I used to sit on that corner bench every morning, legs swinging because they couldn't reach the ground yet. Back then, I didn't have a last name anyone remembered. I was just Eli, the boy with big eyes and a quiet stare, who showed up one day outside Mrs. Hayward's bakery, alone, holding a teddy bear with one ear missing. I don't remember how I got there. Not exactly. There were pieces, a blurry road, a broken car window, crying in the dark. But no one came looking for me. Not that day, not the next week, not for a long time. But what I do remember is this. Mrs. Hayward wrapped a warm cinnamon roll in paper and handed it to me without saying a word. Her hands were soft, flour-dusted, trembling slightly when she touched my shoulder. She didn't ask questions. She just brought me inside and sat me near the oven, like I belonged there. That was the first time I felt warm in days. That night, when no one came to claim me, she tucked me into the back room of her bakery with 2 blankets and a pillow that smelled like vanilla. She told me I could stay until we figured things out. We never figured it out, not in the way most people meant. What happened instead was the neighborhood raised me. In the weeks that followed, I became something of a community secret, a silent agreement between neighbors that maybe, just maybe, this little boy needed all of them. Mr. Greaves from the hardware store taught me how to fix leaky faucets and sweep the sidewalks. Rosa, the flower seller, braided a daisy into my hair each Thursday and told me stories about the wind. Even grumpy old Curtis, who yelled at kids for stepping on his grass, gave me a tiny wooden birdhouse kit and said, "If you're going to be around here, might as well build something that lasts." I didn't speak much back then. Didn't need to. People saw me, fed me, corrected me, hugged me when I flinched, praised me when I dared to smile. They didn't try to replace my family. They became one without even meaning to. And so I stayed. Years passed. The city called me a foster case. But the truth was, I wasn't in a system. I was in a family of storefronts and park benches and streetlights that flickered just before midnight. That was home. That was love, even if no one ever said the words out loud. When I turned 7, Mrs. Hayward bought me a navy blue backpack with my name stitched in yellow. Just Eli. No last name? Not yet. But that backpack. It was the first thing I ever owned that hadn't been passed down or found. It smelled new, like pencil shavings and clean hope. She packed it every morning with a sandwich, a juice box, and a folded napkin with a smiley face drawn in jam. I started school late that year. The principal, Mr. Langston, asked who my guardian was. Mrs. Hayward simply smiled and said, "The neighborhood." He didn't argue. Maybe he saw what I saw, that it wasn't one person holding me up. It was dozens. Every day after class, someone new picked me up. Mondays, Rosa with a flower in her hair and a soft, humming voice. Tuesdays, Mr. Greaves, who made me carry the grocery bags so I'd grow strong. Wednesdays, Curtis, always 5 minutes early and never smiling, but always there. Thursdays, Becca from the bookstore, who let me pick a comic to borrow. Fridays, Mrs. Hayward, who waited with hot cocoa in a thermos and stories about her late husband. I never had play dates at home because home was everywhere. And still, something deep in my chest kept whispering, where did I come from? Sometimes at night I'd stare out the bakery window and wonder what my mother looked like. Did she sing? Did she laugh like Rosa? Did she bake? Did she lose me? Or did she leave me? The question lingered, but the answer never came. Until one rainy afternoon, 3 years later, when everything changed. It was a stormy Thursday, the kind where the sky bruises purple and thunder rolls through the bricks. School let out early, and Becca wasn't there yet. I waited under the awning, holding my backpack tight. That's when a substitute teacher, young, unfamiliar, knelt down in front of me. "You okay, sweetheart?" she asked gently. I nodded. "What's your name?" "Eli." She looked confused. "Eli, what?" I paused. It was the first time I realized I didn't know how to answer. She smiled kindly and said, "You remind me of someone. I used to teach in Bridgeport years ago. There was a boy there, same eyes. He was taken from a car crash outside the city. Parents never found." My heart jumped. A car crash. A boy with no last name. Same eyes. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to the bakery ovens clicking in the dark, and wondered, was she talking about me? Was there someone out there still looking for me? I didn't tell Mrs. Hayward right away, but the next day I asked her the scariest question I could muster. "Do you think my real parents are still alive?" She didn't flinch, just set down the tray of morning croissants and wrapped me in her arms. "I think the people who love you, wherever they are, would be proud of the boy you've become." But I saw it, the flicker in her eyes, like maybe she'd been waiting for this question for years. After that conversation with Mrs. Hayward, I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way she kept a folder locked in the bakery's filing cabinet. The way Mr. Greaves sometimes paused when someone asked about my past. Even the way Becca from the bookstore once said, "Some stories take time to finish, Eli," while ruffling my hair a little too sadly. So one day, after school, I asked the question again. This time, not to anyone, but to the little wooden bench outside the bakery, where I always waited for pickup. Who were they? The bench didn't answer, but the wind did. It blew a yellowing envelope out from beneath the display stand, slipping just enough under my feet that I noticed it. I picked it up carefully. My name was written on the front, just Eli. Inside, a photograph. A man and a woman standing beside an old blue car, both with dark hair and tired eyes, but smiling like the sun was behind the camera. The woman was holding a baby with one hand and waving with the other. Me? I flipped the photo over. There was a handwritten date, October 12th, Bridgeport. Bridgeport, the same town the substitute teacher had mentioned. My chest felt heavy, not scared, not even sad, just full, like something long asleep had started to stir. That night, I didn't eat much dinner. I just stared at the photo, tracing the lines of their faces with my thumb. Mrs. Hayward came to sit beside me, quiet as always. "I wasn't supposed to show you that until you were older," she finally whispered. "You knew them?" "I knew of them," she replied gently. "The car crash happened the night before you appeared here. No one came looking for you, Eli, but I recognized the timing. I had a feeling." "Why didn't you tell me?" Her eyes glistened. "Because I didn't want you to feel abandoned. You were never alone here. You were wanted, every day, by all of us." I reached for her hand. "I know," I whispered, and I meant it, but I also knew I needed answers. Not because I was ungrateful, but because even the most loved kids deserve to know where they came from. The next day, I asked Becca if I could use the bookstore's computer. She hesitated, then nodded. I typed, "Bridgeport Hospital records, October 12th, missing child, car crash." The results were mostly locked or outdated, but one article came up from a small-town paper. "Local couple in coma after highway wreck, child passenger missing." The names, Daniel and Lillian Reeves. The child, Eli, 3 years old, presumed dead or abducted. My heart thudded so hard I could barely breathe. I printed the page and ran, first to Mrs. Hayward, then to Mr. Greaves, then to Rosa. None of them tried to stop me. They didn't tell me not to hope. They didn't say, "Don't be silly." They only asked, "What can we do to help?" That night we sat in the bakery, every neighbor who'd ever fed me, helped me, loved me, all around a long wooden table like a council of hearts. And we made a plan. I would write a letter, and we would send it to the last known address of Daniel and Lillian Reeves, not because we were sure, but because I had a right to ask. So I wrote, "Dear Daniel and Lillian Reeves, my name is Eli. I'm not sure if you're my parents, but I have a photo, a memory, a scar above my left knee that matches the one the newspaper mentioned. I don't want to disrupt your lives. I only want to know, was I yours? If so, I'm safe. I've been raised with love, and I'd like to meet you, if that's something you want too. With hope, Eli." We mailed it that night. I didn't sleep. I waited and waited. The envelope arrived exactly 17 days later. It was thick, cream-colored. My name was written in elegant handwriting, not rushed, not uncertain. Just Eli. I held it in trembling hands, afraid to open it, afraid not to. Mrs. Hayward stood behind me, silent but steady. I finally tore the seal. Inside, 2 things, a folded letter and a second photograph. I looked at the photo first. A hospital room, white and sterile, but filled with warmth. 2 people sat on a couch, a man with salt and pepper hair and tired eyes, and a woman with soft curls and a blanket over her lap. Both were crying. They held the letter I'd written in their hands, I sat down before I could fall. And then I read, "Dear Eli, there are no words strong enough to hold what we feel. We've read your letter 100 times, and still it feels like a dream. For years we thought you were gone forever. We were told there was no sign of you after the crash. Your seat had been ejected. The forest searched for days. They said we lost you. And yet, here you are. We've spent the last decade grieving a son we thought we'd never get back, and now we find you, safe, kind, loved. What miracle could match this? Eli, if you're willing, we want to meet. No pressure, no expectations. Just a chance to know you. We are so sorry you had to grow up without us, but we are endlessly grateful to everyone who loved you when we couldn't. With all our love, Dad and Mom," Daniel and Lillian Reeves. I couldn't move. I just sat there, clutching the letter, while Mrs. Hayward leaned forward and gently rested her head against mine. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "I have parents," I said, almost like I didn't believe it. "You always did," she replied. "Now you just have more." The next few days were a blur, full of whispered phone calls, arrangements, and cautious excitement. The neighborhood buzzed like a beehive of protectors and cheerleaders. Mr. Greaves built me a suitcase from an old trunk. Rosa gave me a ribbon-wrapped journal. Curtis pressed a $20 bill into my hand and said, "For emergencies or snacks." And Becca, dear Becca, hugged me so tightly I thought I might break. "You know you can come back any time, right?" she whispered. "I'm not leaving," I said. "I'm expanding." They laughed, and then cried, all of them. The reunion was set for a Saturday. Bridgeport was only 2 hours away, but it felt like another planet. When the car pulled up to the small white house with the lilac tree in the front yard, my heart nearly stopped. And then the door opened. They looked just like the photo. Older, a little more fragile. But their eyes, my eyes, were the same. We stood there, 3 statues, until my mother stepped forward with tears streaming down her cheeks. "Eli," she said. I didn't wait. I ran into her arms. My father joined seconds later, and we stood in a tangle of lost time and found hope. No words, just the sound of hearts catching up. I stayed with my birth parents for 2 weeks. They gave me the guest room, but I noticed the little details. The old crib disassembled in the attic, the photo albums with blank spaces where my life should have been, and the calendar still marked every October 12th as Eli's Day. The house smelled different from the bakery. No vanilla, no yeast rising before dawn, just lavender detergent and thyme. At night, I heard my mother cry softly. Once I passed by their door and heard my father whisper, "He came back. After all these years, he came back." But even as I tried to fit into this home, a quiet ache formed inside me. They were kind. They were mine. In name, in blood. But I'd lived 1,000 lifetimes already on that bakery street, chasing newspaper routes, planting tulips with Rosa, learning how to fix a leaky sink with Curtis. That was also mine. One evening over dinner, I looked up from my plate and asked softly, "Can I show you where I grew up?" They paused, then smiled. That weekend we returned to the neighborhood. The welcome was overwhelming. Curtis stood awkwardly by the bakery gate with a banner that read, "Welcome home, Eli." Mrs. Hayward wore a new floral apron and had baked an extra batch of cinnamon rolls. Rosa had tears in her eyes before the car even stopped. And Becca? Becca ran toward me and pulled me into a hug so hard my ribs ached. "I missed your face," she whispered. I laughed. "I was gone 2 weeks. Too long," she said, wiping her eyes. My birth parents stood quietly behind me, watching. Then, to my surprise, Mrs. Hayward walked over to them. She extended a hand. "I'm the one who taught him how to make grilled cheese." My mother's lip trembled. "And I'm the one who rocked him to sleep for 3 years. They didn't argue. They hugged. Tight. Like only people who've loved the same child can understand. That night, we all sat in the bakery, passing around stories of me like they were holy. The time I tried to sell mud pies on the corner. The time I got lost in the bookstore for 4 hours reading comics. The time I cried because Rosa didn't let me water her roses twice in one day. My father chuckled. "He used to eat peas one at a time. Took an hour to finish dinner." Mrs. Hayward nodded. "He still does." They laughed. And I watched them, my 2 sets of parents, bonding not over who raised me best, but over the boy I'd become because of all of them. Later, as the laughter faded, my mother reached over and touched my hand. "You don't have to choose, Eli. I looked at her. She meant it. I just want you to be happy, she continued, and that might mean being part of both worlds. I turned to Mrs. Hayward. She nodded slowly, her eyes misty. We raised you to stand on your own feet. Now you choose where they lead you. I didn't sleep much that night. I walked the streets of the neighborhood under a pale moon, hearing echoes of my childhood in every corner. The bench outside the bakery, the chalk markings on the sidewalk from old hopscotch games, the bookstore window still lit late into the night. The next morning I sat both families down, took a deep breath, and said, "I don't want to leave anyone, so what if I don't?" They stared. "I want to finish school here, live near the bakery, keep my roots. But I also want you," I turned to my parents, "to be part of it. Visit, stay for holidays, be my family too." Silence. Then my father smiled. My mother nodded. Mrs. Hayward clapped her hands together, and Becca muttered under her breath, "Finally." The weeks that followed felt like something out of a storybook. Not because they were perfect, but because they were real. My parents rented a small house on the edge of the neighborhood, close enough to walk, far enough to give space. They began volunteering with the library and the community kitchen. My mother even started teaching watercolor classes at Becca's bookstore every Thursday afternoon. The people who raised me didn't retreat either. Curtis still made me shovel the bakery walkway on icy mornings. Rosa still corrected my grammar in public. And Mrs. Hayward, bless her, still called me at 6 a.m. sharp to say, "The croissants aren't going to butter themselves." I wasn't anyone's project anymore. I was family, everywhere. But I wanted to give back more than just affection, so I proposed an idea. One afternoon I stood on a crate outside the bakery and gathered a small crowd. My birth parents stood beside me. The rest of the neighborhood, curious as always, circled in. "I want to start something," I began. "A foundation, for kids like me." A few heads tilted. Not just orphans, but anyone who's fallen through the cracks, anyone who doesn't have a home or doesn't know where to belong. Becca whispered, "He's doing it." I smiled at her, then turned back to the crowd. "We'll call it the Neighborhood Nest. It'll be part mentorship, part shelter, part community center. No red tape, no endless waiting lists. Just people helping people, the way you all helped me." There was silence. Then Rosa clapped. Then Curtis. Then everyone. Mrs. Hayward pulled me into a hug that nearly broke my spine. "You never stop surprising me," she whispered. It took 6 months to get off the ground. We refurbished an old building on Maple Street, the one that used to be a laundromat. Volunteers poured in. Donations flooded, and slowly the space transformed. Bright walls, bean bags, shelves of books, a kitchen with always warm soup, and a giant mural on the back wall, painted by the neighborhood kids. At the center of the mural, a small boy sitting on a bakery stoop, surrounded by outstretched hands. The plaque beneath read, "Raised by many, loved by all." The day we opened the nest, a girl named Ava wandered in, maybe 11, too thin, eyes too guarded. She wouldn't speak at first. She just curled up by the window, watching the world go by. I brought her a sandwich and a small notebook. Later that evening, I found the notebook still on the table. One line had been written, "Is it okay if I stay?" I picked up a pen. Underneath I wrote, "You already belong." That night I stood at the door long after the last light was turned off. My father came up behind me. "She reminds me of you," he said softly. "She is me," I replied. He put his arm around my shoulder, and I realized this was the full circle. Not the end, but the beginning of every child who thought they were forgotten being reminded they mattered. They say some lives begin twice. Mine did. Once in a hospital room with tiny lungs and a heartbeat too fast for my own skin. And once on a cold bench outside a bakery, wrapped in a towel, with the world not expecting much from a child with no name, no history, no family. But life had other plans. I tell this story now not because I want sympathy or even praise. I tell it because every time I see a child walking alone, looking over their shoulder, I remember what it was like to believe that no one would choose you, that your presence was a burden, that your voice didn't matter. But someone did choose me, and then another, and another, until a neighborhood raised a boy whose only possession was a first name whispered into the wind. I kept that bench. We moved it to the front of the neighborhood nest. It's worn now, the wood softened by time, initials carved by dozens of kids who call it their thinking seat. Sometimes I sit there and watch them. They laugh louder than I ever did. They argue over pizza toppings and music. They cry when things hurt, and they let us hold them through it. One afternoon, Ava, the girl who once asked, "Is it okay if I stay?" sat next to me. She was older now, hair in braids, nose sunburnt from playing too hard. "Did you ever hate them?" she asked. "The people who left you?" I thought about it. The truth? There were days I did. Nights I cursed shadows and asked why I wasn't worth staying for. But then I met people who redefined love, who showed up not out of obligation, but out of choice. "No," I said, "because if I did, I wouldn't have room for everything else." She nodded and leaned her head on my shoulder. Some stories don't need a grand ending. Sometimes the ending is a quiet morning where the kids are fed, the doors are open, and the laughter spills into the street. Sometimes the ending is just peace. I still write letters, still slip them into new backpacks, under pillows, between pages of books at the nest. Little notes that say, "You matter. You are not what happened to you. There's always room at our table," because that's what saved me. Words, warm hands, a community of people who looked at a lost boy and said, "You're ours." My name is Eli, and I was raised by a bakery, a garden, a bookstore, and a woman who called me her son before the paperwork ever caught up. And now I raise others, not by blood but by bond, because family isn't always who you're born to. Sometimes it's who stands beside you when you're too tired to stand alone. And if you're reading this, just know you are never truly alone. Not while there are still neighborhoods with open doors and benches that remember.